Okay, good afternoon, Low Carb Canberra. I'm back, and this is the last segment of our, or not quite the last segment, but the start of the formal talks for the afternoon. I have with me Michelle Austin. Michelle will tell us who she is, and what she's talking about today is why is it so difficult to change. So Michelle has been working in the area of change management over a long period of time. So this is a particular passion for her. For the rest of the afternoon, what we're going to do is have a talk from Michelle. Then Tracy will talk about her experience as a health coach, working with people trying to achieve practical change. And then after that, we'll have the final panel for the afternoon. We'll gather as many people as we can, and we'll try and address some of those questions that have been posted. So if anybody out there has any particular questions, feel free to put them in on our Q&A section on your screen. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Michelle. Thank you very much for being here this afternoon.
My pleasure. Thanks, Liz. Hello, everyone. It's a weird way to do this, but I'm really happy to hear that there's been a lot of people online, and I'm really thrilled to be here sharing a little bit of my story with you. My background is in sports psychology. I started as a sports psychologist quite a long time ago and moved into change management about 15 years ago. So I did a lot of work helping athletes to change their behaviour, and now I'm more likely to be found in some federal government department or other, helping them enact change. I have my own low carb story. I'll show you a picture if you like. So 3 years ago, that was me. They're pretty shonky pictures, the first two, because they're my ID pass from work. So I was in a Department of Health actually, and 3 years ago, not very healthy. I was well over 110 kilos. My blood pressure, unbeknownst to me, was 260 on 180, and had everything wrong with me. There's a few eyebrows raising in the background. I had dreadful arthritis, I had terrible anxiety, and I was just generally very unhealthy. I went to the doctor for an unrelated issue to blood pressure, and he thankfully took my blood pressure and he said, "Are you okay?" I said, "No, I'm here because I'm sick." And he said, No, that's nothing. Are you okay? And that's when we found out that the blood pressure was so scary high. So I had this burning imperative to lift my game. He put me on medication, of course, and I was happy to take it because I, A, didn't want to die, and B, didn't want to be in hospital. But there's something about that medication, the concept of being on it, that I didn't like, even though I was already on medication for anxiety. I said to him, "How do I get off it?" And he said, "Don't even talk to me until you've lost, or until you're under 100 kilos, basically. Come back then." So I grabbed a low carb book that I had seen around the traps and read it, and have mostly been low carb ever since. That's why I put stupid COVID picture up there. There's been a bit of backsliding, and I'm really grateful to be here today and talking to you about changing, because I'm using it as a catalyst for myself. I'm hoping that some people out there get some interest and some extra skills from some of the information I have for you, but I'm also using this bit of a kick up my own butt. So why is it so hard to change? So I've got here comes the science. It's an odd bit of science, but I think you might find it interesting to learn why we find it so difficult to change our behaviour. My background in sports psychology was where I came across this particular bit of science. I used to work with elite athletes who had every reason in the world to change their behaviour, because we were talking about skills changes. We were talking about them wanting to be the best possible athlete they could be. And yet even they found it really hard to do something differently, to change the way they've done something that was an ingrained habit. So I investigated a concept called mediational learning, and this led me to discover proactive inhibition. Proactive inhibition is essentially a lock and key mechanism that protects your memories. It's how we don't forget things that we have learned well. Things that we haven't learned well, they're not very well protected by this mechanism, but things that we have practiced over a long period of time, we hang on to them. So proactive inhibition helps us to not forget important information, but our brain doesn't do a very good job at filtering what's important now compared to what was important 6 months ago or 6 days ago. So when we try and change an ingrained behaviour, for example, one of the athletes I worked with needed to raise her head when she ran. She was a bit of a head down runner. Or in our context, if we're trying to change the way we eat or adopt some fasting habits, why is it so hard to change that behaviour? Well, anytime we try and mess up information that we already have well learned from our past, this proactive inhibition slams into place. This lock and key slams shut. No, you're not changing that. I took a long time to learn it. I'm very comfortable with it. We're done here. And this is why so many of us have fantastic intentions. We're well informed. We have support in place, but we don't manage to make this change stick. We can do it for a while, or we can do it sporadically, but it's not sticking. So it's because of this proactive inhibition, this lock and key that says, I don't want you to change the way the knowledge that you have. So how do we get around that? Well, luckily there is a way. Willpower is not enough by itself, in many cases. There is a concept called the normal rate of forgetting. That means when you learn something, there's a normal period of time. It's about 6 weeks, where if we practice that new thing a little bit, we'll start to slowly forget it or not do it as well over that 6-week period. Proactive inhibition actually causes an accelerated rate of forgetting. So it causes us to let go of new behaviours and new skills and new knowledge really fast. If we want to sustain this new knowledge over time, one of the most successful ways that I encountered as a sports psychologist was called mediational learning. It's also called old way, new way, which is a name I much prefer. It's much easier to talk about. It doesn't sound so scary to some of the athletes that I was working with back in the day. So let's talk quickly about what mediational learning is, and then I want to give you a bit of a run through about how you can use it to try and help shift some of our challenges when it comes to changing the way that we want to behave around food or fasting. So this old way, new way comes in 3 stages. We've got the initiation stage, we've got the mediational stage, and that's the hard work bit, I guess, and then we've got the final application stage where we try and bed it down. So I'll just quickly talk about what each of those entails. In the initial stage, we take the skill that we have. The example that I had before was of the runner whose head was dropping down too far. Or in our example, it might be that I really want to make sure I eat low carb at work because I'm pretty good at home when I've just got my family around me, but at work when there's all those tempting birthdays and morning teas and coffee expeditions and the place I'm at the moment, there's Thursday takeaway that someone goes and gets every Thursday. It's ever so tempting. So we want to be able to show in this initial preparation stage that we can perform the new way. So that would mean that we're not ready to go on to stage 2 if we've never managed to decline the cake, or if we've never managed to lift our head when we're running. So this initial preparation stage is where we clearly learn the new way of behaving. We don't have to learn the old way, we already know it, but it's where we demonstrate that we know how to do the new thing we want to do. The mediation stage is where the hard work comes in. I'll start with the sporting example because it's a little more concrete than a behavioural example. In this mediation stage, for this runner, for example, work with the coach, and we would have her out on the field running, and she always found that the coach had talked with her about lifting her head and having a better posture when she ran, but it was only when the coach was present that she remembered to do it. And when she was out training by herself, it just didn't happen very much. In this case, the coach was the mediator, the trigger, if you like, for the new behaviour. So when she could see the coach to the side of the field, or when the coach was right next to her and they're discussing the drills, she was there, she could do it, she had her head up, it was brilliant, it worked, but it didn't stick all the time. So in this mediation phase, the coach and I worked very closely with her to identify physically how her body felt when she ran with her head, like a turtleneck runner, like this, and the shoulders were up and the head was forward, and how it felt when she ran with this lovely relaxed throat and shoulders, and how the posture was, and we were concentrating on her neck. We spent a long time flipping backwards and forwards between the two, and you might think, wow, that seems really counterintuitive to be practicing the wrong way way of doing things, but it's really important to this technique that the manifestation of the old way, how it feels, how it looks, how you think about it, is really well understood by you. So we spent a long time examining this and also examining the new way. We then spend 5 really intense examinations where you perform the old way, you perform the new way, and you stop and you have this really intense conversation about the difference. So she would run old way, she would run new way, and then we'd stop and say, tell us everything. And she talked a lot about the old way felt more comfortable because she was used to it, but the new way felt freer in her breathing because her throat wasn't so constricted. The second round, she could say a lot more about the new way, and the old way, she just kept saying, well, it's just what I know, it's how I feel comfortable. What I found with all of the athletes that I worked with, so by the time they got to about the third session, third go round, they would start to say, do I have to do the old way? It doesn't feel as good. It's not very comfortable. It's actually slower. It's not giving me the outcome that I want. And they had to, you have to do all 5. By the 5th one, it was very grumpy about doing the old way and very happy about doing the new way, thinking, wow, this actually feels really good. The purpose of these 5 really intense examinations is not just to teach the difference between the old way and the new way. The purpose is to create a new pathway for this information with a new connection or a new trigger, a new mediator. So rather than relying on the visual of the coach by her side, she could then rely on her own connections that she had made for how she felt when she ran with the correct posture. I should add that posture is a great example. As soon as you run with a dodgy head, then the shoulders come up and then the hips go back and then one arm was going out. And it was all very awkward, but you can only work on one thing at a time. Old way, new way doesn't work if you're trying to fix 10 different things at once. So let me very quickly talk through this second stage in a low carb example. We'll go back to the work situation. I really don't think it's a good idea to sit down at work and try and do it for real, because it's kind of not what you're there for. It's a bit embarrassing potentially. And I don't really think it's a good idea to start eating all the cake when you're really trying not to. Instead, and here's where the harder work comes in and where it might help you if you do this with a friend or someone you trust, is to just imagine it. To spend some time relaxing in a comfy spot and imagining, recalling how it feels to eat the things you don't want to eat in the work environment, what self-talk is going on, whether you're saying, I shouldn't be having this, oh, but it's so good, one won't hurt, I'll get on the bandwagon tomorrow. So what self-talk is going on, how your body feels afterwards. I don't know about you guys, but if I eat too much sugar these days, I feel headachy and bloated and my knees hurt, which is totally weird, but I know it's about inflammation. And I don't sleep well. I get brain fog. So I'm sure that by this stage, if you're serious about using this technique, you'll have examined how you feel when you eat those high carb foods in that setting. And so sitting and imagining how that feels to eat that way at work, and then how it feels to not. And imagining that scenario of how you feel physically, maybe what self-talk is going on. So you can see why it's very difficult to do that if you haven't practiced the new way quite a lot first, because you don't have enough to draw on. You don't have enough to bring you along that journey. So we do these 5 really intense examinations of how it all feels. And that would probably take you, if you do it justice, probably take you an hour and a half, that 5 examination stage. So the last part is the generalizing. And that's to take this hopefully new and much more ingrained skill and to generalize it to other scenarios. So a classic example might be, so now I'm going to try it when I go to dinner with my mum. Let's go. Or it might be, so now I'm going to try it when I'm out with my friends for a dinner on a Friday night, rather than just the work morning tea scenario. So the idea is that you practice this newfound skill in as many different environments and situations as possible, and that you consciously pay attention to how you feel, and you reflect back on how you would have felt if you used your old way, which was to eat the things you've chosen not to eat. I had immense success with this with the athletes I work with. I'm also a hypnotherapist, and I have to say the athletes love doing it under hypnosis. So if that's something that interests you, there's quite a few really good hypnotherapists in Canberra in particular. And I would suggest you could take this idea to them and do that with them, because it just makes it a much richer experience to be really immersed in it that way. So this technique, old way, new way, is simply about creating a new pathway for this behaviour that you want. Because if you try and change the old pathway, that proactive inhibition is going to get in your way and it's going to not help you. There are, of course, other things that you can put around this idea to help you even more. So as a way of wrapping up, let me talk through some of those, and they can help you to cement this technique. If it all seems a bit hard, if old way, new way seems a bit technical, the last slide that I have will give you some very doable, practical, everyday activities that will be a great adjunct to old way, new way, but also stand on their own 2 feet as well. So, first of all, you have to be ready. I was very ready because I had this burning imperative of not dying. So that was an excellent motivator for me. But if I'm brutally honest with you guys and myself, I knew there was something wrong. I didn't know what it was specifically, but I knew I felt dreadful. But there was something in that moment that I was then ready. And in all my experience in change management and in sports psychology, if people aren't truly ready to make a change, that's where this cartoon comes in. It's like, I really want to, but I'm not actually wanting to right now. So I think we should be kind to ourselves. If we have not quite got to the point where we're truly ready to embrace something, I think we should be kind on ourselves and spend a bit of time practicing the new way without beating ourselves up for also doing the old way. Education is helpful for a lot of people. I found that immensely helpful for myself. I read a lot of things. I listened to a lot of podcasts that Richard Morris happened to feature in, and I read some fantastic books, The Obesity Code by Dr. Jason Fung and What the Fat, which comes out of New Zealand. There was a lot of things that they suggested that I went down all those rabbit holes, and I felt very well informed that I was making a choice that I thought was a very safe and healthy one for myself. So if that's something that you usually like to do a bit of research, I would really strongly encourage you to do that. There's some great resources out there. And I know Liz has put some really good articles up on the Low Carb Canberra Facebook page as well. Reinforcement is fantastic, and having a cheer squad really helps with that. But also reinforcement for yourself. I heard a great idea to either take measurements of your body, like lots of your body, not just your waist, with tape measure. But someone else had this amazing idea where they got pieces of string, so a piece around the chest and a piece around the waist and a piece around the hips, etc., and hung them on the wall. And each time they wanted to take a measurement, instead of an actual centimetre number, they would get a new piece of string and hang it up next to the previous one for the waist, for example, and they could see how the new waist string was getting shorter and shorter. I thought that was absolutely genius. A really nice visual representation of how much their body was shifting. So that kind of reinforcement can be really helpful if you're doing low carb for weight loss. A strong reason is very similar to desire, a burning imperative. For a lot of us, it's health. For others, it's desire to do the best thing for longevity. I know we've got some discussions tomorrow about sustainment and how we can sustain ecology and agriculture and our health in conjunction. So having your own personal reason, I think, is just very helpful. Goal setting actually isn't for everyone. A lot of people love it. Some people hate it. It's an interesting dichotomy. I was forced to do it a lot in sports psychology, and it was always interesting to me how some people just thought it was so motivating and others just would roll their eyes and, oh God, not this again. So if that's your thing, if you really like setting yourself goals, fantastic, do it. If it's not your thing, don't feel like you have to. There'll be other ways that you can work towards your goals without having to map them out if that's not something that appeals to you. If you've never done it, I would suggest you try it before you make your mind up. Having a mentor or a coach or a role model is another thing that I think is really helpful in terms of embedding change and helping you work through change. It's so helpful to have someone who is there to push you a little bit or to provide a great example that you can draw on. So someone like Tracy, who is so engaging and connects with you, that kind of coaching I think is really helpful. Or someone who lives near you and you can go walking together and support each other and share recipes, just anyone who can help you through your journey if they've been through that journey themselves. Positive mindset sounds a bit trite, but a willingness to try and a willingness to innovate will get you a long way. It's so helpful to see this as a journey rather than an end result that I'm aiming for. And so if the journey is what's captivating us and what's driving us to learn and to innovate, then that's where we will be much more likely to sustain our effort over time. Journaling is great for a lot of people. So keeping some kind of, doesn't have to be a dear diary, today I ate eggs kind of thing. We write that a lot. I drank black coffee, but more about whenever you feel you need to, or whenever it's helpful, or you want to remember something that worked or didn't work, to jot it down. And on the days when you're feeling like you need a bit of extra support, you can go back and read it. And it's amazing how helpful it can be to see how far you've come, because you'll make tremendous progress. And finally, and this is what I think we should try and do a lot more than maybe we do, is having a script for the tough moments or the tough people. So low carb is becoming much more popular, as is fasting. I'm hearing a lot more about it in the mainstream, but it's still not a mainstream accepted way of living in a lot of our current society. And it can be quite difficult for us when we hit those people or those scenarios where we know that it's not going to be well accepted and we have to try and defend ourselves. Some people don't bother, but others want to have something that they can say, and it's really helpful to have scripted it in advance. I can't give you a script, I can offer suggestions, but it really has to be in your own authentic voice. So if you know that there's a scenario, for example, work and the morning tea situation, if you know that that's going to come up and that the people that you work with, they might be good people, but they really want you to join in the cake eating, it's really helpful to have worked out in advance what you're going to say, because then you're more likely to be able to say it and to not feel pressured into eating the cake if you're choosing not to. An example might be something like holding your coffee. Oh, thank you so much, but I'm really enjoying this coffee. That's all I feel like right now. Anything that helps you to feel like you've got something to say about why you're not partaking when perhaps you always used to. As I said, though, it really has to be authentically driven from you. Otherwise, you won't feel comfortable saying it and it won't sound authentic and people won't believe you. So I really encourage you to work on your own scripts. It's just a sentence. It's not a lecture. You're not trying to convince other people. It's just finding a way to help everyone around you feel comfortable so that you feel comfortable. And I think that's something that we should try and do more of, is prepare ourselves better for those scenarios and to think about them in advance and to have that tool in our toolkit. So wrapping up, my final thoughts. I really liked that quote, if you don't like where you are, move, you're not a tree. It just appealed to me a lot. We're not a tree. We can shift. We can shift how we do things. And that notion of old way, new way helps a lot with that, because we're not trying to negate or erase the years that got us to where we are, the behaviours that got us to where we are. We're just trying to change some of them. And when that gets hard, we need to move. We need to work around that proactive inhibition. We need to find new connections. We need to create new experiences that are exciting to us. I am thrilled, as I said in the beginning, to have been able to share this with you today. If there's questions online, I will be more than happy to try and answer them if that's possible in the forum that we've got, and I'll be sticking around for the panel. So for now, that's all from me, and thank you very much.
Michelle, don't go away.
I'm here.
Stay
I'm right here.
Right in the camera.
Okay.
Thank you very much for reminding us of the importance of practicing the new pathways. And I think that's a really key message here, as well as bringing that awareness and perhaps compassion to those, the fact that we fall into old habits so easily because they're there.
Yes, and they're comfortable.
And yes.
Well, my brain knows.
That's right. Someone has asked, commented on the 5 times in a, is it 5 times in a row?
It is, yes, it is.
So not over a period of time?
No, they actually have to be consecutive for it to work properly. If there's too long a gap between them, you kind of have to stop and start again. It's not going to work. So the idea is that in those 5 trials, I appreciate I went over it quite quickly. In those five trials, you're really trying to cement the key differences between how the old way felt and how the new way feels. And those trials have to run one after the other, which is why I said it'll take you a good hour and a half to get those 5 trials done, because you really have to think hard, to dissect hard, to try and draw out of yourself every nuance you can, so that you get the full benefit of working through the process and coming to the feeling at the end that the new way feels better. And you won't get that if you don't do the 5 in a row.
Sure, and thank you very much for that. So the time frame is actually like 1.5 hours. It's not spread out over 5 days or 5 weeks. It's all in a fairly compressed time.
It's short and sharp. The length of time comes into the previous stage, that initial preparation, and making sure that you really, really understand how the old way feels, what outcomes it produces, where it gets you, what you think, what your self-talk is doing, and the same for the new way. And so that actually takes a great deal of preparation. So in the athlete example, we probably worked with that athlete on that old way, new way comparison, that initial comparison, for about 2 weeks at the theatre.
Right.
And we just worked, so she was so bored of it by the end. She was like, can I just do the new way? I'm like, no, we have to do the 5 trials. And even in those 5 trials, she did start noticing even other things that we hadn't noticed before. So the effort goes into learning the new way and understanding it and unpacking how it feels. And then the 5 trials is the way to create that new connection.
And one of the things I appreciated about your talk is you mentioned the journey, and I think low carb is a journey, and some people think that whatever you do, you have to do for the rest of your life, and that's not necessarily the case. I know for me, I've been doing some form of low carb most of the time since about 2014, but over that time, what that looks like has changed quite a bit.
Absolutely.
And you've probably found that as well.
Yes, very much. Yes.
Okay.